Hello and welcome to the Try Mechanics podcast. We've got a bit of a special one today. We've got a fantastic interview with Alex Hutchinson, the author of the book, the recent released book, Endure. So I hope that you enjoy the interview. We're going to go straight into it now and let Alex explain the full title of the book and what it actually means. So welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's great to be here.
So I want you to, can you give me the title to your book? And then we're going to talk about a few of those words that are in that title.
It is a bit of a tongue twister, so I'll do my best. It's Endure, Mind, Body, and the Curiously Elastic Limits of Human Performance.
Fantastic. So the key thing reading that to me, the two words that jumped out more than anything else are both curious and elasticity. So the first one I want to talk about is curious. So my question is to you, why do you think we are so curious about these things as humans?
That's a great question, and I hope we can assume that you're correct, that we are curious about it, because not to go off on a tangent, but in writing this book, so I'm writing a book about the limits of human performance. So the obvious kind of, you talk to a publisher, you talk to anyone, you talk to a lot of readers, and they're like, how am I going to be able to use this to become a better runner, become a better person? What are the 7 practical takeaways? And of course I'm interested in practical stuff too, but for me the real sort of guide that I was trying to follow in writing this book was that I wanted it to be curiosity driven. That's a phrase that I was using all the time to remind myself that sometimes if you only pursue what you think is going to be useful, that guides you in a certain way. But if you pursue just what's interesting and what piques your curiosity, that goes in a different way. And I think had I tried to write a training manual, this would have been a very different book. Maybe it would have been a better book in some ways, but it would have been a different book, and it wouldn't have given me a chance to explore all these sort of curious aspects of human limits, human potential, things like, if I was writing a running manual, I would not have spent a chapter trying to understand free diving and why it is that some people can hold their breath for 11 minutes and 35 seconds. So all of which is to say that to me, this was totally about curiosity. And I think and hope that a lot of people share that, maybe because we all, whether we like it or not, whether we're athletes or not, or just exercising casually or not exercising at all, inevitably in life, we come across situations where we're pushing up against what feel like our limits. And it's often very hard to put your finger on exactly what it is that defines those limits. So I think there's some shared experience, and when you stop and think about it, you say, well, why is it that I can't run faster, that I can't hold my breath for longer? And so hopefully following some of these threads and trying to answer some of these questions, however unsatisfactorily, is something that we're all curious about.
Yeah, no, I mean I think that's dead on. I think the other element that kind of interests me is this idea of performance and human performance, and I guess that comes back to sport. I was having this debate yesterday, and I was speaking to my wife about this, about whether this development of trying to push these limits in sport is because we don't need to do a lot of these things anymore. I mean, we don't have to fight to survive. We don't have to do all these things, and we therefore, I think, as we become more civilized, sport has almost developed out of that as a way of kind of showing that this kind of demonstration of maybe being better, or like seeing what we can get out of ourselves. And I think that's why, and we've got to this point now where we're understanding more than ever before, on a cellular level, on a kind of whole sport level. And I think we just want to know what's going on. And I think, your book has been one of the first that's really started to think, well, maybe all those understanding of the biology, the cells, the physiology, maybe there's more to it. Maybe that kind of, the brain, the control, the psychology is more about, or having more of an input than we thought previously.
Yeah, I think so. And just, to pick up on this idea of struggle has disappeared from our life in a lot of ways, and so we're seeking it in other ways. I think there's some real truth to that the marathon was not a big thing, 400 years ago. And it's not because no one had thought of the idea of running for 42K. It's that we have a need now to search for challenges to push ourselves because life has become very easy. I just finished reading a book by Scott Douglas. It's about running and depression. It's called Running is My Therapy. And I can't remember the details, so I won't try and repeat them, completely. But he has a discussion about some of these in one chapter about some of these things, and I think he talks about, I think it's Viktor Frankl who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor, and talks about this idea of how we've deep in our ancestry, our evolutionary ancestry, we had to have, or our ancestors had to have, a sort of drive to go out and chase the antelope or whatever the case may be, and I think Bernd Heinrich also wrote a book called Why We Run, where the original title was Chasing the Antelope, and that we're now looking for substitute chases in our lives, and so things like endurance sports serve that kind of role of challenging ourselves, but it's not just an itch we have to scratch. It's kind of deeply wired in us to push ourselves.
Yeah.
And like you said, I think then the limits of that performance we have to look inward, to have to look at the mind more than we may have realized.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, that this drive isn't just about, what is your VO2 max? It's what is pushing you. It's the VO2 max or whatever, maybe what's pushing you, holding you back. But to understand your limits, you have to understand what's driving you forward, and that comes from the mind, that impetus.
Yeah, I think you're right in that kind of search for things, because the thing is, I often say to my clients, so I focus on the running side of things, and I've had a belief for a very long time, both based on the kind of evolutionary side of things, that we are as humans meant to run, because it's partly as a mode of transport. If you look at some of the running tribes and people, if you read a great book to read is I think Natural Born Heroes by Chris McDougall. Which talks about, I don't know whether you've read it, but it's about the kind of the role of Crete in the war, and how they had a lot of these kind of Cretians who were sending messages and kind of running over the mountains to pass on these messages and basically disrupt the kind of Nazi soldiers that were in the region, and actually caused possibly more soldiers to end up going to Crete than should have done, and that maybe remove them from the Russian front. So it might have had an implication for the outcome of the war. But the fascinating thing was that they were using running as a mode of transport, as a tool. They use it. If they want to run between one village and the next village, well, why walk for hours? Why not run for a fraction of the time? And I think that's what makes me curious about running, from the perspective of, if it is a mode of transport, and we know that there is evidence that we use it to catch our food. Dan Lieberman in the evolutionary side talk a lot about that. With that in mind, is it the blocks that tell us that we can't do it? I.e., this idea that a marathon is a really long way, or you have to have the right shoes, and you have to have all this right sports nutrition. And I tell people that I believe that if everything was set up right, and I say this about maybe children who haven't been taught how to not run yet, as such, if that makes sense, or put in shoes that maybe disrupt that, they could probably go out and run a marathon if they didn't tell them that they were running a marathon. If they got them just to run and keep running, they could probably do it, because they would just do, as opposed to think about it.
Yeah, and I think they would do it in a natural way that would involve walking breaks and things like that. That we've sort of codified it because it's no longer part of our natural environment. So the marathon is something you do in special shoes on a special course in special circumstances, as opposed to just covering the distance. And I definitely agree that the idea that some humans aren't built to run those sorts of distances, I think is not consistent with what we know about where humans came from and how they evolved.
No, I think that's the thing. It's interesting. I listened to an interview with the pro triathlete Cam Worth earlier, who has transitioned over from cycling, and is kind of, he did amazingly well in Kona last year, really. But the big thing everyone said was he didn't run very well off the bike. And he's like, well, yeah, I'm a cyclist. That's, I was a cyclist. I'm now transitioning. Eventually, I should be good enough to be able to compete on that level. And he was saying about how recently he was at altitude, because he trains with a lot of cycling teams. I think he trains with Team Sky. He's actually coached by the coach of Team Sky, which is obviously incredible to be able to do that as a triathlete. But he decided he ran a marathon in training because he ran a long run and he felt good, so he carried on and ran a marathon. Because he looked down at his watch, and his watch has said that he did it in about 2:45, 2:50 in training. And that was the key thing, that he did it because he thought, well, psychologically, if I look down, I personally have done that. I've personally run those kind of distances in training just to look down and just to have it and say, well, I know I can do it now. Your brain almost says, well, I know now, and you build from there. And I think that's the thing, is that so much of what we do is set up as this block, this mental block of, I can't do this. We're so good at saying that and doing that, but actually that stops us from then exploring possibly what we can do, because we're already putting the block in place.
It's really interesting about that, the point of covering the distance and now you can do it. Because there's this long-running debate in marathon training, what should your longest run be? And a lot of people will have relatively conservative, 30K or 35K, because the cost-benefit analysis of going longer, the extra physiological benefits compared to the risk of injury. And I think, they go up as you go longer. And I think there's obviously some truth to that. Of course, you are, the marginal benefits of going farther compared to the risk of injury. That's true. But the people who argue that you should do a 45K long run, they're not saying, oh, by going 45K, your mitochondria are going to know that, that they can run a marathon. It's all about the mental benefits. It's all about saying, you're going to go through 45, 42K, and you're going to keep going for another few K. So you're going to demystify and get rid of those blocks. And I think that's underappreciated, and of course, running 45K in training, of course it has risks. But when you're comparing the benefits, it's not just the benefits of physiologically, it's the benefits of trying to remove that doubt in your mind and just making 42K another distance. You can run 30K, you can run 35, you can run 42. It's just left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot.
Exactly. I coach triathletes for Ironman, and I get asked the same questions over and over again. And what about the long bikes? What about the long bikes? Because almost all of the plans and people I get people on are take all the long bikes away initially. And I do that for a couple of reasons. It depends on the circumstances. But sometimes I do it for the case of the fact that some of these athletes are, they're working throughout the week. They are trying to fit in training around their work. And then on the weekend, on the Sunday morning, instead of, hanging out with the family and the kids and doing fun stuff, they say, no, I'm sorry, I've got to go out on the bike for 6 hours because the plan says if I don't do a 6-hour bike ride every week, I'm not going to finish an Ironman. And I hate that, because physiologically there may be some benefit. We know that that you upgrade your MCT1 transporters and your lactate shuttle and all that side of things with the longer stuff. Although I guess I do buy into the Andrew Coggan side of things, that you can build that up to quite a high intensity and still get the same benefits with much less time. But the thing is, they often sacrifice those things in order to try and do that long bike, whereas I often just get them to do maybe one long bike in aero position, or on the rough terrain they're going to be racing on, in the position on the bike they're going to be racing on. And if they finish that long bike and they say, obviously it's fine, no problems with saddle sore, no problems with any other issue, nutrition was absolutely fine, I say, well, you tick that off the list. Psychologically, you've done it. And it's not only a big win, but it shows them that maybe it's the psychological element of being able to know you can spend time in aero position or positioning on the bike or for that length of time. And it has a sudden win. I said for years before I had to go Ironman that I don't think I could ever do an Ironman because I'd never found a saddle comfortable enough that I could spend more than an hour on. And so that, to me, I said I would not do Ironman, because why? How could I even contemplate doing an Ironman if I couldn't sit on my saddle for more than an hour? And so that, it wasn't physiological at all. It was simply, do I know I can sit on my saddle? And as soon as I found the right saddle, my block had gone.
So and what was the magic saddle, just from one guy who hates sitting on bike saddles for a long time?
I've actually made my own. Originally it was the kind of Adamo, the kind of split nose saddle designs. Yeah. I decided that being the kind of constant tinkerer, my nickname by my friends is Inspector Gadget, because I take pretty much everything, I break it apart, often breaking it in the process, and rebuild. And I've taught myself how to do various carbon molding and weaving and things to basically repair stuff. But actually, I decided that saddle-wise, I wanted a certain shape that was very much had a kind of certain cutout in the middle that you could almost rotate your pelvis onto it, and you felt very supported. So I basically kept on chopping bits off the saddle until I made the shape, and then I covered it in carbon fibre and remade it again. And it's ridiculously comfortable. Probably only fits me, and it'll probably never fit anybody else. But yeah, it's the same with shoes. With running shoes, I've got very wide feet, so my running shoes have all got bits torn off them and holes put in them on purpose to allow my foot to move and spread. And it's all a bit of this is the thing. So when I think of the word curious, this is my curiosity of kind of playing with these things and seeing what happens. I kind of believe all those things are there to be, played with, because this is all a bit of fun, really. I mean, I'm not doing this as my job, so it's all about, what piques my interest. And I think that leads on to another question of, so I have a bit of a, kind of involvement, of the kind of time trialing scene of, if you've come across that, the idea of, taking that bike out of, triathlon and having it just as a standalone, as, see how fast you can go. And we have a bit of a scene over in the UK where it's all about speed. It's all about numbers. It's not about power at all. It's about how fast you go. Yeah. And I've noticed a certain, a kind of observation as such, that there are some riders that don't want to either buy or experiment with going aerodynamically faster. So, buying a piece of equipment. They would rather get the gain from training. And there are some riders that believe they are never going to get the gain from training, so they spend the money or the time on getting aerodynamically faster. And I think that opens up that world of that kind of the kind of psychological side of things. I think in that some people are driven by different things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot about this kind of thing because I've spent the last 10, 12 years mostly writing, as my profession, writing about the science of endurance. And what that means effectively is writing about, in a lot of cases, about every possible idea for enhancing your performance if you're a cyclist or a runner or a triathlete or whatever. And, then that ranges from different kinds of workouts to different kinds of technology, like, shoes, and performance enhancing drugs or supplements or things like that, and not necessarily illegal ones, but things, whether it's coffee or beet juice or baking soda. And it's caused me to reflect a lot, because there's times when I think, what am I doing? Why am I devoting my career and my sort of attention to this stuff that's kind of secondary to what I see as the intrinsic attraction of the sport, which is pushing your limits. Why should I or anyone care if I can make my marathon, a fraction of a percent faster by drinking a bunch of beet juice? Like, what is the point? Who benefits from that if you're not at the Olympics? And I should say, like, I don't have definitive answers here as to what that means or how we should think about these things. What I will say is my personal perspective is, let's take beet juice as an example. I've probably written 20 or 30 articles over the years about research into beet juice as a performance enhancer, how it works, why it works, whether it works, who it works for, how much you need to take, when, in what form. I've never actually tasted beet juice. I have never had a sip of beet juice. So for me, in my current circumstances, that doesn't hold interest to me. That to me, beet juice is the equivalent of spending $5,000 to make your wheel a few grams lighter. And what I'm trying to get out of sport and training right now is not. I'm not in the time trialer mode. Now, I would have a different answer during the 15 years I spent running track, which is the analog to time trialing on the bike, where fractions of a second counted, and where I wasn't just pursuing personal actualization of seeing how far I could push. I wanted to see how fast I could run a 1500, And if there was something that was within the rules of the sport that could help me, I was interested in pursuing that. I think I would, knowing what I know now, I would have tried things that I never did try as an athlete, things like caffeine and beet juice. So I think we have to understand that different people are motivated by different contexts, and sort of understand that, So I try and remember that. So, and this goes back to actually your previous question. So why do I write about beet juice? Because I'm curious about it. Like, really, beet juice can help you run faster. I want to know how this works, even if I don't necessarily want to apply it to the racing and training that I do right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's the thing. But I mean, I'll ask you a question on that. So you talk about the track. If somebody said to you right now, so let's say let's say your PB is 4 minutes and 1 second. Obviously a big threshold, a big threshold, and something people can often hang their hat on of going below 4 minutes for a mile. And someone said to you, well, they've built this new track, and it's fast. It's really fast. It just got, we've built it out of the same stuff, but it's got this slightly springier compound. Being a 4:01 runner on a regular track, you'll be a 3:59 on this track. Do you go and run it?
Yeah, so that question strikes close to the bone. My best 1500 was 342.43, and if you look up on the IAAF conversion tables what they consider that to be, it comes out to 4 minutes 0 seconds 0.02, I think it was. So I am in exactly that situation where I was not quite a sub 4 minute miler, but awfully close. And look, whatever the philosophically correct answer is. If I was in that situation and you said, "Hey, this track has been built," I'd be there in a heartbeat. Let's not kid ourselves. So, for all that I think the real rewards of running are, or of any sort of endurance sport, are intrinsic, the extrinsic stuff is real too. And of course, but I recognize the sort of philosophical contradiction that it's like, well, why is running 3:59 on a track that makes you 2 seconds faster any different from running 4:01 on a slower track? You're the same person doing the same thing in both times. All you've done is, tilt the track downhill a little bit. You haven't changed anything fundamental. And that's true. I don't have any counter argument other than to say that I would still love to run 3:59 under those circumstances if the track was legal and sanctioned by the authorities. So it's hard to totally, as much as you might like to be the mystic on the mountain who's searching only for self-actualization. I know for me that sure, I'm also sensitive to the attraction of trying to run a little bit faster and use whatever means, because like we've both been saying, I think it's also fun beyond the sort of internal battle. It's fun the intellectual process of trying to figure out what things are holding us back, and whether it's aerodynamics or, optimal nutrition and fueling or whatever else the case may be. In a sense, there is a satisfaction and a sort of glory of the chase, of chasing down the details of optimally setting up your performance as well as the mental battle. So I don't think as much as so my book is all about the sort of internal, the brain's role in endurance, but that's not to devalue the chase of, getting your training just right and, wearing the right uniform and all that other stuff that goes into the creation of the art of a really truly optimal performance where you've taken care of every detail.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's the thing is that, it's an interesting debate that's been going on a little bit over here at the moment, because we have, with time trialing, there's a very, very fast, it's the fastest 10-mile time trial course in the country. It's where all the records are set by quite a big way. And the reason it's so fast is because the surface is good. The conditions of the road are good in that it's got big hills on either side, so the wind conditions are normally relatively good. But also, it has a huge amount of traffic. So on a Saturday afternoon, particularly if the football's thrown out, this road is more traffic than there's barely any spaces. So though people have gone there in this special V course, as it's called, to get really fast times, so they can say that they've done a 19-minute 10-mile time trial. And the thing is, a lot of the kind of American people that see this, they're like, that's incredible. That's over 30 miles an hour. because they're doing these time trials on courses in the middle of nowhere with no traffic. And people like Andrew Coggan have done calculations on what the difference that traffic makes, and it's huge. And actually, the guy that broke the record was recorded to basically, it was shown that he was riding down the middle of the dual carriageway, drafting.
Oh my God.
And then he was backing up cars behind him on purpose, then moving across so that he could get a draft off them for the next few miles. I mean, it's ridiculous. And people are driving at 60, 70 miles an hour on this road. And this is why, but then recently they decided, because a few riders have been killed on it every year, and they've decided the local council have banned bikes on it in the last few weeks. So suddenly all the time trials on it have been cancelled. So all you've got these time trialists that normally travel for 4 to 5, 6, 7 hours across the country to race this course to get this number, and are now don't know what to do with themselves, because they'll never go any faster. They will never ever get a race result any faster, because every other course in the country is at least a minute slower. So
that's
they've
interesting.
got to, I mean, yes, it's a real, and they're all falling apart. Honestly, a lot of them are just don't know what to do with themselves, because they spent thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds on all these little bits to try and get this little time, and they've got the best time they've ever had on this course, and they'll never get it again.
One thing I will say though is, do you remember the swimsuit thing in 2010?
Yes.
And I remember talking to interviewing swimmers as the these high-tech suits were banned or restricted, and there was this whole sense of like, wow, I'm 19 years old, and it's really hard to know that I will never ever again swim a personal record, like that I've because the rules of the sport have just changed. I'm young in the prime of my career, and it's going to be really hard to face continuing to train, knowing that I'll always be slower. And I thought that was really poignant, except that 5 years later, almost all the world records with those suits are gone. Somehow swimmers managed to get faster anyway. I don't want to get all mystical and say that they having shown that they could swim at a certain speed in those suits, they were eventually able to discover that the power was in them and not in the suits. But something happened that they were able to keep progressing, and maybe it'll be possible for cyclists to find out that if they were 19-minute, 10-mile time trialists, that they can do that somewhere else under slightly different conditions. I don't know, but yeah, it's a challenging one.
I think you're right. I hope it'll drive to that. So we're going to take a little bit of a turn now. I want to talk about a couple of things. Like I want to try and make this last bit a bit more kind of practical, and some things people can take away and actually use this. How do they use? Because I've spoken to a few people that have read the book, and I've had slightly differing views, I think, with some of the people that have read the book, because I read it and I believe, kind of between the lines, in that I read some of the things that I could possibly take from it to improve my own performance. It started to make me think about, interval training. So it made me think, well, are intervals physiological or are they psychological? Is it a case of, is an interval training session really just almost taking what you can do or what you think you can do and pushing a bit harder and a bit longer than you thought you could, and setting the bar a little higher? Is that physiological, or is it psychological?
Yeah, I mean, I think as in a lot of cases, the answer is yes. It's both. I think that one thing that I have always been skeptical about is these theories of training where intervals of a certain length work this physiological system, intervals of a different length, or if you change the rest, now you're working on your lactate threshold, now you're working on your VO2 max, now you're working on your finishing kick. I've never really felt that made a lot of sense, or that it's really possible to sort of simplify the physiology of what an interval workout is doing. To me, the fundamental thing about an interval workout is that by inserting rest, you can extend your suffering for longer. That you can, if I run a 5K, it will hurt for some period of time, but there's a limit to how much hurt I can pack into 15 minutes. If I run an interval workout, it's exactly like the art of medieval torture. If you can prolong it, you can have greater suffering over a greater period of time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I spoke. I followed the Stephen Sealer's research on this side of things. I think my view, my take from a lot of his stuff, and I think he explains this sometimes when he gets asked the right questions. For instance, when he was asked about interval training, he said, well, it's actually quite simple in that if you look at the interval training of an elite athlete versus an amateur athlete, they're often just going longer and harder than you are. And that I think that point resonates because basically, so for instance, if they're doing a 3-minute interval, they're not doing the kind of 3 minutes on and then 3 minutes having a nice rest and lie down, and they're doing it 3 or 4 times. They're doing it 10 times. They're doing it, the amount of times you think you could do it, and they're adding on another few, and they're only having a minute rest between them because they're just going to go again as soon as they can go again. And things like Sealer talks about a workout that in research seems to prove very effective, which is kind of 8 minutes on, almost VO2 max level, and 2 minutes off, done at least 4 times. And if I've prescribed that to athletes who've almost been sick at the thought of it, let alone even having a go at doing it. And that almost summed it up. I've done it with athletes now, is that it's almost like I give them the interval session that kind of makes them scared. But I try and do it in a way that they can try and accomplish it. And if they accomplish it, it's an amazing boost for them because they suddenly realise what they were able to achieve.
Yeah, and the nice thing about interval workouts is that they're well set up for incremental progress. That if I remember one season when I was living in Britain, we found a hill that was, I think it was about a minute long, and we decided to do hills every Saturday morning starting in like January. And the first time we went there, we did 6 times this hill all out, and it was a really hard workout. And the next week we did 8, and the week after we did 10, and the week after we did 12, and the week after we did 14, and the week after we got up to 20. And if you had talked to me in January and said, how about doing 20 of these hills, I would have said that, that's stupid. I'll get injured. I'll die. I can't do it. I'd have to jog the whole way. But I was never adding more than 2 after every given week. And, it's so interval training is, and so, yeah, there were some great physiological benefits, I'm sure, to my muscle fibers to being able to do 20 of those hills at as fast as we were doing 6 earlier. But also, boy, like to finish that workout, and it was just before then track season was going to start, gave me this amazing sense of self-efficacy of like, holy crap, I just did this workout that I would never even 2 months ago have thought I would have been able to conquer. I must be ready to go. Get me to the track because I'm ready to race. So there were huge mental benefits to knowing how fast and how hard and how much I was able to suffer, and to progress and to be able to see how that goes, rather than just going out and like running as hard as I could for 20 minutes once a week or something like that.
I think that's the thing. The word there, the perfect word, is incremental. I mean, that's the things. I mean, I've developed a few kind of, particularly running and cycling, training kind of interval routines that have worked perfectly for me in the past and that I've used with athletes. And one of my favourites has always been what I kind of call the inchworm. And it's the basic premise of it is that you set up you're on a treadmill, and it's 10-minute sets where you start off the set at kind of the first set starts off at your kind of tempo speed. So let's for argument's sake, let's say 14 kilometers an hour on 0% gradient, and every minute you drop it up, or put it up by 0.5. So you end up getting to the end of basically at about 4.5-5% on 10 minutes. And then you have a minute rest, and then you hop back on and you start again at 14.5 kilometers an hour, and you gradually increase it. And so I get people to do that, and they often do it, and they'll have a go, and they're meant to fail normally on about the 3rd set. They get meant to fail about 8. If I've got it right, if I've got the numbers right for them, it's normally about 7 to 8 minutes maybe on the 3rd set. But the key thing is I tell them to do is that they need to start running dialogue with themselves, particularly when it's getting harder. They need to look down and they say, right, well, the next, I'm saying the same speed. All I'm doing is increasing by 0.5. I can barely sense that. That change in gradient is barely, that change in incline is almost, my body can't sense it. It's only a tiny bit. So they start playing games with themselves. I can do this for another 30 seconds. I can do this for another minute. And it's all about, and I think that's where that kind of, the idea of the central governor and that side of things comes in. is that you're saying to yourself, I can just go a little bit harder, just a tiny bit. It's such a small increment, and that enables you to then get to the next level. And when you've got to the next level, you're like, I need to get to the next level, or let's see what I can do. And it really starts to, I think, open up that idea of of gradually pushing up that incrementally, so that you then achieve that new basically new level that you then start off at next time.
Yeah, it's like the proverbial frog in the boiling water. If you drop the pot in the frog in the pot, it's very, very hot. But if you just turn it up a little by little, you can get to a very, very high temperature before you even realize what's happening. And each time you're like, well, if I can handle this, I can handle, like you said, I can handle 0.5% more. That's a marginal difference. But
exactly.
After 5 minutes, it's a big difference. But you've eased yourself in.
So yeah. So I think that's the thing, is that I think that people, as you say, people often jump in, don't they? They jump up. They say, right, well, I'm going to be able to do this level, and I'm going to be able to do this amount of intervals at this speed, and they try and if they fail at it, they beat themselves up. They say, well, I couldn't do it, right, I'm going to drop, and they almost lose all hope. Whereas if they took that idea of, well, I can do this now. I love the whole. I mean, my favourite book on a lot of this stuff is Carol Dweck's Mindset, because of the word yet. I may want to be able to do that in the future. I may have that goal, but I can't do it yet, but I will.
Yeah, and I'll say this: I'm in my 40s now, and I have 2 kids under the age of 4. I'm not training the way I used to. I'm sort of inconsistent now. Well, I'm consistent in that I run every day, but in terms of really getting fit, depending on how my wife's work and my work is going, it comes and goes. And one of the great joys that I've had in running in the last, let's say, 5 or 6 years, is that unlike in the olden days when I was consistently fit except for my off season, it's like I get fit now and then, or I get unfit now and then, and I love the process of getting fit. That is the bonus. If I'm getting fit 4 times a year now instead of once a year, 4 times I get to go through that experience of going out with a friend, doing a workout, and just getting absolutely demolished, and thinking to myself, that was rough. And in 3 weeks, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to, at the same pace, and I'm going to do twice as far. And it's one of the greatest feelings in the world, as far as I'm concerned, of seeing progress over the course of 4 weeks, let's say, of seeing how amazingly quickly your body can adapt, your body and your mind can adapt, and how you can learn to push on. And that's another point on that, is that it's like, yeah, I've been running for 25 years or whatever. That doesn't mean that it's all the work is done. And each season, each new time when I'm out unfit and starting to get fit again, not only does my body have to readapt, but my mind has to readapt. Like, you don't keep that ability. You start at a higher point each time, of course, but each time you have to relearn how to push yourself to the limit, and I love that.
Well, I think that's the epitome of being in love with the process, not the goal. And I think that's the thing. That's the key thing, is that as you find out where you are, is that being goal driven. I mean, as Carol Dweck will talk about, and that side of things, can develop this fixed mindset of, if you don't achieve it, then everything else has failed. But if you start falling in love with the process, I mean, when it comes to things like triathlon is a great example of, it's all about the process, because there isn't really a goal. I mean, unless your goal is to win the Ironman World Championships, setting a new course record, you're gonna, unless that's the top goal that you can pretty much go for. But then, if you set that as your goal, then you're most likely to fail, because only very few people can ever achieve that. But if you set to the process of, I just want to incrementally improve, and maybe when physiologically I can't improve on something because of, for whatever reason, maybe age and those bits and pieces, but maybe I can outthink things. That's the thing about triathlon, and the rules, and talking about the swimsuits and all those things, is that I think that's part of the reason why triathlon has not established rules, and a lot of these rules that everyone else has got, because they kind of almost encourage the innovation, the fact that actually, you can probably, possibly make something that, or test things that might make a little bit of a difference, and it's part of the fun, I think, for most people. That whole process is, for me, I mean, that's for sure. My body, I've got problems with my hips, and so my body has been a limiter for me for a while, but I've tried to think, well, if my hips are limiting me, maybe I could, try things like shorter cranks on the bike to see if I can make something else work for me. And that's, I think, part of the excitement of it, more than anything else.
Yeah, and I agree with, of course, with the idea of loving the process. And from a practical perspective, in terms of training, that's why I always like when people are asked, how should I train to run such and such a time? How should I train to run a 4 minute mile? And it's like, well, don't worry about how to train to run a 4 minute mile. Worry about what you can do now and train to run a little bit faster than you can run now. And then once you can do that, train to run a little bit faster. And in a sense, of course, it's worthwhile having goals, even specific time goals, and it's worthwhile to understand what it will take to get there. But to have a meaningful training plan, you have to start with where you are, progress from there. And if you do that, and if you can do that consistently over a long period of time, you're going to achieve far more than if you just base your training on some goal that you've plucked out of your head or that corresponds to a round number or something like that.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
being better tomorrow than you are today is a great feeling, and it's also, I think, a very smart way of organizing your training.
I completely agree. I mean, I tend to have a lot of athletes that will often give a goal of I want to win sub this or I want to get top three in this. And my question is always, okay, well, what did the winner do last year? And they often can't answer. And it's like, well, that's the point, is that it's not about the winner, because you don't know who's going to turn up. A triathlon, you may prepare your whole year and be in the best shape ever to win a race, a local race. And it just might happen that Alex Brownlee's gran lives round the corner and he was, visiting his gran, thought, well, I'll have a go at a race. He turns up, wins the whole thing. And that's the thing, you never know who might randomly turn up. That's the thing. I mean, I found out recently that a small little triathlon I used to do a long while ago back home, the course record had gone that I held for a long time. And I was really proud that I held that record because it had beaten a previous record held by somebody who's done very well nationally. And I kind of felt like that was a real benchmark. And the course record went. Until I then found out that the reason the record went was because they had to significantly shorten the run course because of a problem. And that I was like, honestly, I was distraught when I found it because it was the one last thing in my triathlon, my history that I thought I would never lose because of, to be honest, I had a very good race on a very good day. And to find out that, but I actually, in a slightly sad way, I kind of, because they still have the course record on the board on the kind of sign up day with the
Oh,
person's
nice.
name on it. And I said to somebody, will they change that? Will they put the new record on because, or will it say the new record but run course was short? And I can't help but think those things, they're so silly, yet they were, as I say, it's as if, I mean, it's very much like I know people that did, the Manchester Marathon a couple of years ago. And loads of people did PBs because it was a great day. It was a lovely sunny day, no wind, fantastic race. Then it turned out that it was 200 metres short. And
Oh
they took all
man,
of those, and they took all the London Marathon slots away. And it was
ouch.
horrible for all those people because if it had been 200 metres longer, they still would have got their PB, but they took away the result. The result was no longer official, which I think was just ridiculous because it wasn't their fault. But it was, that's the thing is that so many people were so pleased and proud, and they broke their PB by way more than what 200 metres would have taken them. Yet suddenly it had been taken away from them.
Oh
So
man,
yeah,
that's such a
it's
that's hard. That's a hard story to
I
hear.
know.
That must have hurt.
So I've got another. So I wanted to tell that one last thing. We mentioned it already, and it's a bit of a pet subject, but caffeine and coffee. Okay, so I read with your kind of recent article with interest, and I've got actually I don't know whether I told you I've actually got a 23andMe currently being analysed,
Oh, cool.
and I'm sitting there, I'm fingers crossed, I'm praying, I'm not in the group that doesn't respond because I love my coffee. I roast my own coffee beans. I take it to a whole new level. And
Yeah.
I've used it in the past, I believe, for performance gain, but I'm not so sure it does with me. And this is an interesting question I've got for you: is that I don't find, seemingly, feeling-wise, much of a benefit when I take caffeine and tablets. Yet I have a fantastic response to coffee. And interestingly, I actually seem to have a response to decaf.
So my advice to you is when the envelope comes or the email comes from 23andMe, burn it.
Yes,
Don't open
I
it.
thought you were gonna say
Do
that.
not find out. Don't ruin it.
Because that's the thing is that, so I have a view of caffeine. So this goes back to, do you know who Tommy Simpson, cyclist, was?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously he died, and it was most likely related to kind of amphetamine overdose. So we know
Yeah.
that cyclists used to use amphetamines. Now, when it comes to coffee, the people that respond to coffee, the people that get that buzzing feeling that we get, even when the first sips, because we absorb some of it in our mouth, that feeling of top of the world feeling from coffee and caffeine, is that what caffeine's doing? Is it about the kind of that input as opposed to a physiological input?
So before we started recording, we were talking about Samuel Marcora, the researcher at the University of Kent. He would strongly argue that yes, that what caffeine is all about is altering your perception of effort. So caffeine does a ton of things. Like you can take a mussel in a petri dish, and if it's caffeinated, it will contract more strongly. It also alters, as you know, your metabolism of fatty acids. So it theoretically, in long events, allows you to rely more on fat than carbohydrate. It's very hard to demonstrate that all these sorts of effects are real, but whether they have any practical significance for performance is very hard to say. But caffeine definitely has effects in the brain, and I'm not a neuroscientist, so I don't want to offer an explanation that will turn out to be wrong. But basically, it has an effect on adenosine, which is a brain chemical that's associated with mental fatigue and perception of effort. And so, as you said, caffeine, even absorbed through your mouth, you're already taking some in. Like, so caffeine gum, for example,
Yeah,
is actually
I've actually made my own, and that's really sad.
Oh, you are a tinker.
I know. Well, it's partly because I have a bit of an aversion to artificial sweeteners and various other things, but also because for some reason that caffeine gum, the one that Sam used, has become unavailable in this country. Okay. Almost every supplier, it's become unavailable. I don't know whether there's something going on in terms of the import of caffeinated gums or something, because all sources have suddenly lost all stock.
Maybe the military has been buying up all available stock.
Maybe.
But yeah, no, I think so. I don't know. Like, I don't think there's definitive research that answers these questions, but certainly Sam Marcora's take would be that, yeah, what matters is what it's doing to your perception of efforts. What matters is what's going on in the brain. And in fact, what's going on with it, but it also has physiological effects. That can be negative. It may constrict blood vessels. It may in some people it may sort of hinder flow of blood to the heart or the muscles. So it's a super complex thing, and yeah. So I mean, I don't know the answers, but one thing I would say is after I wrote that article that you're referring to, which suggested that maybe 10% of people metabolize caffeine in a way that makes it disadvantageous. A couple of things I would say about that. That study was done for exercise of a duration of I can't remember, it was like 10 or 20 minutes or something like that. So if what matters there is how fast the caffeine was metabolized, then the duration of the exercise is probably relevant too. And so it may be that if you're doing something that's 2 hours or 10 hours, the effects are totally different than if it's for something that lasts 10 minutes. So I'd be cautious about overgeneralizing and assuming the worst. The other thing is I got after I wrote that article, I got a message from a guy named John Troutman, who's kind of a running legend in the U.S. He was a national high school record holder in the 80s. He went to the Olympics when he was a university student in the 5,000 meters. And then he became like a Wall Street trader, got way overweight, then decided to get back in shape and, lost 30 pounds and set a world record for the indoor mile in the 45 to 49 category. So super talented guy. And he had his genome done, or his genes tested, and he was shown to have the genotype that's associated with a negative effect of caffeine. And he sent me a message saying, what's going on? Oh no, I feel like I can't even work out with the caffeine. It's essential to my workouts. And now you're telling me it's actually making me slower. And my response to that was like, whoa, slow down. Like, on the basis of one study the last thing I would want to do is tell a guy who has competed at the upper levels of, the world over the course of several decades that, hey, you're doing it wrong. Like at a certain point, I would say to John Troutman, the guy who sent me this message, and what I said to him is like, man, you're at a level where you need to be able to trust your instincts to some degree, and don't let a study that may not be applicable to your particular case, and where there may be individual variability, where even if on average people with your genotype gets lower, maybe presumably some get faster. So like the balance of positives and negatives is different in every person. So this was another one of those things that I think was really interesting intellectually to tell us about how we understand the role of caffeine, or to give us some new hints. And also that should serve as a reality check for people who are 100% sure that caffeine helps them, or feel guilty because they're not taking caffeine. But, if it's part of your ritual, if it's something you enjoy that gets you in a happy space, man, I'd be cautious about throwing that all to the wind, because of this study that doesn't necessarily apply to your circumstances and your situation, regardless of what your genotype is.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's the thing. But the thing is, as you're saying that, I tend to find that coffee sometimes can upset my stomach a little bit. If it's a certain type of roast, it can be, I can get a little bit of kind of acid reflux and some not nice feelings, and it makes you feel a little bit sicky sometimes. And maybe that's the thing, is that actually, you're looking at that kind of short duration, whether there was actually time for the caffeine to be absorbed properly, whether it's the caffeine and all those bits and pieces, and whether, as I say, but sometimes I have an espresso and it kind of peps me up, it makes me feel really good, and that then seems to decrease my perceived effort. So as you say, as Sam would say, it's all about the actual effect on our perceived effort. And I think that's when it kind of interesting is I find the caffeine gums, like that military gum that Sam mentioned, is incredible. But it's partly because I know what it is, almost. I mean, I know he said that he obviously did a study where he didn't know what it was, and that he actually his concentration was improved with the caffeine gum than it was with placebo on some tasks. But I would definitely say that, I mean, this is why I think I get a bit of a response to kind of decaf, is that it's the taste of coffee. It almost gives me that sensation. And this is interesting, actually. I've been listening to a recent book called Suggestible You, all about brain neuroscience and this side of things, and mentions a very similar thing that actually happens, that they actually noted with alcohol. You actually changed the label on alcohol bottles and gave someone a non-alcoholic beer, and they perceived feelings of being drunk, even though there was no alcohol, because they were expecting to. And actually, a lot of these feelings are about expectation, not the actual chemical.
I think that's a great point. And there's always a temptation to say, like, let's say you give someone non-alcoholic beer and they start acting funny, and you're like, oh, they're just faking it. Well, yes and no. I mean, they may not be conscious of faking, because like you said, it may be real. And probably, just like with placebos, you give someone a placebo, a placebo painkiller, they'll have actual endogenous, opioids in their brains will be transmitted. So there's the expectation generates real physiological action in your body and in your brain. And so, whether you've got a Pavlovian sort of response to the taste of coffee, maybe that is, but if it makes you faster, and this is why, going back to my sort of whole mixed feelings about spending all my time pursuing all these, digging into all this evidence, or trying to uncover what evidence really supports our beliefs about performance. It's like sometimes more knowledge isn't helpful in terms of improving your performance, because if the decaf is helping you've got nothing to gain and everything to lose by proving that it actually doesn't help you.
No, exactly. I think the other thing is, I mean, this kind of makes me think a little bit about the idea of performance, things like intervals and all those bits and pieces, and trying to get the most out of yourself, and this idea of maybe kind of visualization, or this idea of what you can do to make you feel like you're on top of the world. So I've got a bit of a slightly odd story that will probably really, and its beauty is in its oddness, I think, more than anything else, is that I used to find that when I was running on a treadmill, as a good example, or I was running, that I could improve my performance by visualizing cycling up a hill. And it wasn't any particular, it wasn't any random hill. It was actually a situation in my past where I was on a bike and I dropped some people that I thought were probably stronger than me, and I felt amazing. And they were trying to catch me up whilst we wound our way up Sacalobra and Mallorca. And they weren't catching me, and they were working together, and they still couldn't catch me. And it gave me this massive boost, and it set up my best triathlon season to date, because it suddenly gave me this amazing feeling I could accomplish anything. So thinking back and remembering that, and I actually had a piece of music that I was playing I think I remember having it on in the kind of flat that we were staying in at the time. And so that piece of music reminds me of that situation. So I have that music playing whilst I'm running on this treadmill. And it gives me this almost this tingling on the back of my neck. And it's very strange. But it improves my performance. And I almost do the reverse. When I'm on the bike, I often think about when I've run well. Because I find that if I was on the run thinking about running, it almost brings it back into what I'm doing. It makes me too aware of what I'm doing. Whereas, does that make some sense? So it's kind of
you don't want to literally be reliving that moment. You want to be regaining that feeling, that great feeling. And I know that when I used to daydream a lot when I was running, and quite often, especially in the last sort of quarter of a run, I'd be daydreaming about either great races of the past or great races that I hoped to have in the future. And it would become so real to me, and I would get that sort of feeling of all over warmth of like, isn't this, I'm invincible and I'm just flying across the ground. And I often have had that sensation of having to consciously stop myself from raising my arms above my head as I'm running through the park, because I'm in my head, I'm winning a race and I'm running down the finishing straight, and everything is just so wonderful that I just want to put my arms up above my head and acknowledge the screams of the crowd. And then I have to remember, like, I literally have had noticed that my arm is halfway up and coming above my head. Like, Alex, don't celebrate. You're just running a training run. But it definitely, gets something out of me.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the thing is, I'm going to take the story to the next level now. And this is where it might get. This is the bizarre bit. So I used to be a doctor, and I used to work in what's called kind of CCU, which was the cardiology intake unit, and we had a lot of cardiac arrests. Now, cardiac arrests for a lot of people, particularly young doctors, are a very scary situation, because suddenly everything's, to put it bluntly, the shit is hitting the fan in one go. And there are people running everywhere, and it's all over the place. And honestly, it's probably my favourite part of medicine, because suddenly you've got all these people working together to try and do whatever they could to save the life of this person. And it's an incredible feeling. But also, I'll be honest, there was that element of futility in that often you knew that they may not be a good outcome. And so you were just doing whatever you could. It didn't matter. It didn't matter whether you... whether while you were taking the blood, whether you did something, whether you caused any pain, because it didn't matter anymore. You just had to do the stuff. You just had to do it. There was no, and so that was a almost very exciting situation. And it was very bizarre. I once had a thought whilst I was running on this treadmill in this gym. This almost thought came to the back of my mind that what if somebody collapsed? What would happen? What I do? Being an ex-doctor, but I kind of felt, well, I used to run those situations, and I kind of have this thought in my mind that I would be able to jump off the treadmill, open the box that's got the defibrillator in that now all the gyms have, and hopefully save that person's life in a way that maybe someone who didn't have the medical training I had wouldn't be able to. And that almost, I know, even talking about it now gives me prickles on the back of my neck. And I started thinking about that as actually that you almost using that. And so I started, when I visualised, when I was training, of thinking of situations in my life where I felt like I was, like people want, like I did something amazing. And people, I guess I'm talking to people out there now, is maybe not thinking about that time that you won that race, or that you did this or did that, but maybe the time that your child said, hello, daddy, or, those incredible situations where you suddenly felt like, wow, I did that. I did this. I feel incredible. And that those could be the kind of visualizations you use. They don't have to be sport. They just have to be that visualization, that feeling that makes you feel like you can accomplish anything.
I think that's a great point, and that it's really interesting. Just thinking about the idea of being able to summon that it's not necessarily trying to summon the feeling of running fast. It's yeah, like you said, the feeling of power, of ease, of knowing that you're in control and you can do it. And yeah, any way you can summon that up, it's gonna be helpful. But it is it's sort of funny to imagine you running down the straightaway of a race, and if the thought bubble above your head is doing CPR on someone.
I know. Well, and it sounds really odd, but it's almost like. But sometimes it goes through. When you're thinking about when I've been doing races. I've thought, well, I like the fact that sometimes I'm there because I've been I've been in situation in that unit where people have had arrests in situations where no one was there that could do anything helpful, and they've unfortunately died. And then we've seen it obviously with athletes now. You saw it at the Paris-Roubaix on the weekend. I don't know whether one of the riders died.
Yeah.
That, and the thing is that yes, there was medical staff there straight away that could do all of those things, but there's been situations where that hasn't happened for the first few minutes and that could be critical. I see all these defibrillators now around, on the walls in Morrison's, and a friend of mine actually sells them, and he'll tell anybody that can listen, just do it, just get the defibrillator. The defibrillator will tell you what to do. Don't be scared. And yet everyone is scared. They wouldn't want to try and shock somebody, even though that would be what could save that person's life. And I think I always liked that feeling of like the fact that a little bit of that training, the fact that you could do that, could make such a massive difference to the right person in the right situation. And that's, as I say, that going back to my medical side of things, that most of medicine was relatively dull, but in these small opportunities, you've got this potential to truly kind of save someone's life, which is, I don't think you could. There's almost nothing you could do better in the world, I don't think, than save another human's life.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of puts setting a PB in perspective.
Exactly, but I think it's things it's like that's people need to think about. That actually, maybe sport isn't the end of the world, but if it gives you those feelings of feeling like you could accomplish anything, that means that you go home and you decide, right, well, I'm going to try and get that job that'll get me a bit more money so to support my family and those things. Then it's a great thing. It all forms part of life, isn't it? It's all part of that picture. So
yeah, it gives us meaning.
Thing I just want to so I've got a quick question to kind of finish things off, and this is because at the end of the day, all this stuff is fantastic, but does it actually, would it help the person out there? So I've got a question. Feel free to answer it any way that you want to. If you were coaching somebody with all this knowledge in mind, how would you approach kind of coaching somebody to make them better in terms of, obviously you said already, well, it's a case of it's finding out where they are and going a little faster rather than having that goal. But would you design their program based on the kind of the psychology element, or how would you think about it?
Yeah. This is obviously it's a tricky question to answer in the abstract because, like you said, it depends on who the person is, what their goals are, what they're doing, and I think as much as I'm emphasizing all the mental side of stuff, it's like you have to get the training reasonably right. You don't have to get you don't have to worry about the exact details of the workout and how much rest, but you do have to be sort of in the ballpark. You're not going to be a great marathoner running 2 miles a week, and you're not going to be a great marathoner running 500 miles a week. Either way, you have to get in the right ballpark. And so I think if I were coaching someone, a lot of what I would do, the physical, how much should I run today, how far, how fast, would be pretty standard, plain vanilla, no different or very little difference from what runners have been doing for the last few decades. I think that what I've taken away from the book that I would try and apply, and what I don't think I did enough of in my own career, is to pay attention to what we've been talking about of the mental side of creating belief. And there are different ways of doing that. So in the book, I talk the sort of message that I emphasize in the book that I take away is there's some pretty remarkable science now showing that motivational self-talk can be very effective. So becoming aware of the internal monologue, that the voice in your head that you experience during races or training, identifying negative thoughts, coming up with alternatives, practicing them till they become second nature, so that in the heat of a race, you're not saying, I can't do this is too much. You're telling yourself, I'm ready for this. I've trained for this. So I think that's that's probably an approach I would take. But I would also say there are lots of different ways of getting there, and that great coaches over the years, great athletes have found their own ways of pursuing that goal. So I spent a bunch of time last year covering Nike's Breaking 2 marathon, and there was lots of science and tech to write about and to get kind of stuck into. But one of the things that really sticks with me, as in hindsight, is Eliud Kipchoge's mental approach and how he went about this process of very deliberately, right from the start when I was asking him, like, okay, you just ran a half marathon in just under 60 minutes. How are you going to go twice as far at the same pace? What's your plan? How are you going to change your training? And his response was, I'm not going to change my training. My training will be the same, but my mind will be different, which at the time it struck me as just sort of empty words. But I think it was in hindsight, I realized that he was very seriously going about in his way, trying to build the belief that he was going to be capable of attacking the 2-hour barrier. And I think back to coaches I've had and coaches I've read about who, maybe aren't interested, don't know the first thing about or care about lactate threshold or anything like that, but are very motivational and are very good at building belief in their athletes. And so, I don't know how, because I'm not a coach and haven't been a coach, I don't know how well I would do or exactly how I would go about being able to build the belief in their athletes. But I know that would be whether I use motivational self-talk or some other technique, that I'd be paying attention to that goal as much as I'd be paying attention to their workout splits, to creating an athlete who will show up at the start line of a race feeling confident that he or she is the best possible athlete they can be on that day and ready to do as well as possible. So it's these are easy, these are like big picture goals. It's easy to say what the goal is. How you get there, I think, is something that's still an art, and I guess maybe the real answer is, since I'm not an experienced coach, I shouldn't kid myself and think I'd know how to do that. That I think it takes trial and error, and I think it takes experience, not just sort of book learning to be able to do that.
No, I think that sums it up perfectly. I think the mention about the night breaking 2, I think, is interesting because I got a sense, and I think you underlined it a little bit there, and is that maybe that mental side was a bit that they kind of not missed, because it was covered, but maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe actually there was that element. Maybe the fact that, what Joe I would love to have seen, I would love to have seen them rerun it a few days later. And I think if they had, I think he would have done it. Because I think he didn't think you'd get that close. And I think knowing you get that close, but then maybe they could have fiddled with the clock. Those kind of things. In that we've seen in things, when you change the numbers on the board and people are going faster or slower than they think they are, it changes how they actually then, what they do. And that maybe if they fiddled with it and he'd either thought that, he did that from that perspective, that maybe he could have done it, just like the kind of Roger Bannister side of things. It was all about the psychological barrier, and once it was broken, plenty of people started breaking in.
Yeah, it would have been interesting had they made the clock run, 1 second per mile fast. I do think that the psychological sort of, my impression when that race was finished was that the psychological effects of Kipchoge running 2 flat 25 would be huge, and that we would start, people could no longer be scared of going through a half marathon in 61, even under normal record conditions. Now, the first opportunity we had to see that in action was in Berlin last fall, and it was raining and cold, and so it kind of fizzled out. We'll see what happens in London this year, and it's not all about one marathon, but over the next few years, we'll see what happens and see whether there's been a change in the perception, not just of Kipchoge, but of top marathoners from around the world, and particularly from Kenya and Ethiopia, whether they now are looking at the marathon and saying, yeah, there's nothing scary about going through in 61. After all, Eliud has run 2 flat 25. And I think there's going to be a real effect, but we're not going to know until we see it.
No, exactly. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. That's been absolutely fascinating. Covered lots of different bits and pieces, and hopefully there's some bits and pieces people can kind of take away and think about their own training, as you say, with bringing in that psychological element. And obviously I say to them they've got to read the book because it adds such a different facet of training that they may never have achieved or may never have got from other sources before. So thank you so much, Alex.
Thanks, Tom.
We've been going on about different things for over an hour. So, but thank you so much.
Well, it's been a really interesting conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I hope you find that interesting. I hope that gave some introduction to some of the topics in Alex's book, Endure. I strongly recommend getting the book. It's absolutely fascinating, particularly with Sam Makura's research and all those different elements that you can kind of bring in, and maybe things that you can possibly add into your own endurance training. If you want to know a little bit more about the book itself, if you look on Endure, you can buy it from Amazon and various other places. Also get it on Audible, which is the way that I did it so that I could listen to it. If you want to know a little bit more about us at Try Mechanics, then you can go on www.trymechanics.co.uk. We're also on Twitter under Try Mechanics and Facebook under Try Mechanics as well. Thank you very much. Have a good week, and we'll speak to you next week.